Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
just see what you're trying to look for.
Where this mostly takes place in the palace is a very divided place, seemingly between the genders. That there's sort of the area for the men and the area for the women, and the two are separate, but there are these people that go in between, that are able to kind of be in both spaces and between both spaces and really play kind of an interesting role in the story throughout. So I thought that might be an interesting thing to pay attention to as we discuss as well. Um, so, so welcome. Glad that y'all are here and are spending this Shabbat afternoon together. Adar is not here yet. That comes in on Friday. So we're getting close, and then Purim is in the middle of the month. So it'll be here soon. It's time to dust off those Hamantaschen recipes and um, get your Mishloach Manot going. But we're getting there. So it's a hopefully a timely course of study that we'll be doing. So those of you here in the room, we're going to be projecting the text up there. Um, and of course, those of you at home, you can look at that. You can bring it up on your own screen if you want, or if you have a hard copy, feel free. Um, and we'll go through and we'll take turns reading and we can pause and discuss and we'll see where it takes us. Um, we have the structure of the Megillah to guide us, but this can also be a pretty free-flowing conversation, as Torah study sometimes is. So I'll begin. I should have the same translation up here. So it happened in the days of Achashverosh or Achashverosh that Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Kush, which many people believe is probably around Ethiopia. So a big area. This is um, placing the Jews at the moment in Persia. So if that's the center, you can kind of imagine the span of Ahasuerus's uh, reign, at least according to the story. And in those days, when the king Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his service. For no fewer than 180 days he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. Okay, so this is an all-out, unending party for all of the special people in his vast kingdom. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up by cords of fine linen and purple wool to silver rods and alabaster columns. Kind of amazing how they're getting so specific here. And there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance as befits a king in golden beakers, beakers of varied design. And the rule for drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. Um, so again, this is showing the opulence, right? That nothing is being spared here. They're having a grand time, and it seems to be somewhat expansive in that everyone who lives in Shushan is included, right? High and low alike. So this is, yes, he's hosting all these governors and rulers, but it seems like at least for those in Shushan, everyone's invited.
What's the time period BC?
I want to say it might be around the third century. I think it's roughly in that area. Um, And in addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. So this seems to be a separate banquet, right? So there's the men over here and the women over here. Both of them are partying, having a great time. And on the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered all of these people, right? Mehuman, Bizeta, Harbona, Bigta, Abagta, Zethar, and Karkas, the 7 eunuchs in attendance on Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. Yeah.
So I did notice that they didn't go into detail about what they had at the party for the women.
Mm-hmm.
So we can only imagine whether it was the same or not.
Uh-huh. Right.
Wait, this might be really elementary, but is an Enoch a castrated male?
So, yeah, a eunuch in Hebrew is saris, and there's some discussion later like rabbinic works of like what does it actually mean to be a saris, but yeah, a castrated male is one of the interpretations, is one of the possibilities.
What are other possibilities?
Well, it could be, someone who, we might call it intersex, right? Someone who was born with genitalia that were not clear. It could be, but I mean, what's clear is that it's somebody who is not fully in in the realm of the men and not fully in the realm of women, because they can go between the two. That's why Ahasuerus is calling on these 7 to send the message to Vashti, because he himself, even though he is the king, it seems can't go into their space. And the only way for Vashti to come into his space is through this invitation, which will come about later on with Esther, when she wants to have a meeting with the king, and if he hasn't called to her, then she has to find a way to get to him and to get into his space. And so there's some danger, it seems, and it'll become more clear later. There's some danger there's some danger for the woman to go into the male space, that when uninvited. Um, so this is a very different moment where Vashti is being invited into the space. You might say it's a bit stronger than an invitation, right? Is this more of a demand? And the verse says that wearing the royal crown or the royal diadem, and many interpret that as saying that he wanted her to be there only in her crown and nothing else. So the text isn't that clear, but later interpretations try to make that point.
When it says the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus.
Yeah,
Attendance,
like they were his servants. They were,
that
yeah.
just meant,
It is a weird preposition.
Yeah,
Right.
Say, like, right, in this word.
right, and and that's
right, I was reading the
somewhat
rest of the sentence.
that's somewhat something to do with the transliteration, or sorry, the translation,
Okay.
because it says hamshartim et pnei hamelech, so they were serving or ministering literally the face of the king. So if it were al, it would be upon in Hebrew, but et pnei is like on they were serving his face.
I'm
Or
getting
like
a whole new idea about this. The eunuchs, were those the gender fluid?
yeah. So they ask or tell Vashti that the king would like her to come and display her beauty, right? But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. So it wasn't so much an invitation as it
Mm.
was. I'm just looking at the Hebrew. It doesn't say command in Hebrew. It says by the word of the king, be devar hamelech. So the translation's a little bit stronger than the Hebrew points to. I mean, the reaction is the same, right? By the king is that he
You
gets
know,
very
something
angry,
that-
yeah, and kicks her out. But the text itself doesn't say it was a command. You might say a decree.
And the text also doesn't call the Ten Commandments.
That's right. Um, so the king consulted the sages, learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were well versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were these people with Persian names, and the seven ministers of Persia. They were the seven ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom.
None of those names are the eunuchs.
No, those are his advisors. And interesting that the person who we don't see here is Haman.
Mm.
Right? He will kind of become the closest advisor to the king later, but not here. What, he asks, shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? So it's interesting that they didn't have to say that it was conveyed by the eunuchs. They could have just kind of dropped that piece out. So it's interesting that this phrase, this term keeps coming back, which kind of, I think, highlights the importance of them and their role in this story. That they over and over again continue to highlight that they are the ones who delivered the message that the king wanted them to deliver. I wonder if that's the king's way of saying, I didn't do anything wrong by going into the women's space. I followed protocol. She's the one who's going against what's supposed to happen.
But it's interesting that he turns to all these people to find out what to do.
Yeah,
He's the king and he, what he couldn't say, wait a second, she didn't follow my command or
right.
This is
Right. And later on in the story, it seems that he can make a royal decree and be fine with that, just on his own. But here, it's right. It says that's what was done, right?
Yeah.
That was the custom, was to consult with these seven people. Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus.
probably why. So this way you could.
Meaning, we really wanted to see her.
Yeah, right.
Bring the stories of beauty to our people. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that actually says that she was to appear nude. It's supposed to, she was to be there and she was to wear.
Right. Yes. The interpretation is why would it say that she has to wear the crown if they wanted her to wear anything else? Again, that's a midrash. That's an interpretation that of course many Purim spiels have played around with and have also given Vashti more of a reason to say no.
why was she so ready to say no?
You're right.
To which I
Right.
respond, she's hosting a party.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Like
true.
the plain meaning of it.
If come on over and, right, yeah, right. If she were-
Pretty busy.
Leave the party you're planning to come entertain us
Yeah.
at another separate party.
Right.
And also remember, like, there's no restrictions on drinking, right? This is a place that women do not go into, right? And so to go into this space is potentially dangerous, or at least something that would make someone uneasy, you might imagine.
Clothes or no clothes.
Yeah, they've been partying for
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. Um, yeah, for the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. Aha, so it's not just that she refused, it's that everybody's there, and everybody's going to take that as a clue that women don't have to obey their husbands.
I never got that too. All the years of reading.
This is why we're doing
This
it,
is
right? Hopefully there will be more of those as we go through the story. Um,
But that's also like an odd word to use, despise your husband, not
Yeah.
disobey, not like
Mhm.
despise.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Lehavzot is the Hebrew, which does mean to contempt or disdain or despise.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's pretty strong. In biblical terms, when we talk about love, ahava, it's linked to obedience. So when we have the prayer ve'ahavta, right, you shall love Adonai your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might, it goes on to say, essentially that means doing the mitzvot that God wants you to do and reminding yourself of the Torah. And so love is linked to obedience in biblical terms. And so it makes kind of sense that disobedience would be like linked to disdain. Yeah.
That's actually really helpful because I've always found it sort of odd to like, how can you command someone to love you? But
Yeah.
you make it like, right, I'm in a very modern like feeling mode
Yes.
versus something much more obeying.
Yeah, a lot of these emotions that are spoken of in the Torah have actions that go along with them, and it's much more about the way you behave than the way you feel. So I actually wrote my rabbinic thesis on the concept of simcha, of joy. And really for the rabbis and for the Torah, joy is much less about feeling and much more about a series of actions. So I looked at what those actions were in the Torah, like sacrifices are a form of simcha that you're supposed to do on the holidays. It doesn't matter if you're feeling joyous or not, you still have to do the sacrifice, and that's fulfilling the mitzvah of joy.
Right.
And is the implication that the byproduct will be
Right. Is it the hope that you like fake it till you make it,
Mhm.
right? And that doing these behaviors will get you from wherever you are to a place of feeling joy.
Mhm.
The rabbis don't really care so much about that. It might be that that's the goal, but they're much more worried about are people fulfilling the mitzvah, and the only way we actually know that is if they do the action, because we can't command them to feel something.
Supposed to, happy, clap your hands.
Right. If you happen, you know it, give a sacrifice.
Rabbi, can I just break?
Yeah.
So if anybody who's on Zoom, we cannot see if you raise your hand. So is it okay?
I'm keeping an eye on it, but
Okay. But if you want to break in,
yeah, please do.
just
And
unmute.
and also if you're having trouble hearing
Hearing.
anybody like across the table, let me know, because I know we're using my computer's microphone and I don't know the directionality of that. All right. All right, AJ gave a thumbs up. Thank you, AJ. So this very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard the queen's behavior will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. Right? They're just looking for moments. They're just looking for an excuse. So if it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then the judgment executed by your majesty, then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. Right? Our patriarchal institutions are at risk. Let's take drastic action to shore up what it is that we feel we need. That's why we read it every year. Um, so, the proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan observed or proposed. So as we go through, think about who's making the decisions, right? Who's giving the advice to Achashverosh, to Haman, Haman to Achashverosh. There's all sorts of intricacies in this story about where the ideas are coming from and then who's executing those ideas. And so a lot of spiels kind of paint Achashverosh as just sort of a foolish king who's being used by everybody in the story. And so you can kind of see why it wasn't his idea to kick Vashti out. He's like, hey, people, what do you think I should do? And he just did whatever he was told. So not really showing much decisive leadership.
Although
Yeah.
he did, if he would have said something just on his own, it just would have been related to maybe he and Vashti, but
Mhm.
maybe by getting everybody else involved in making the decision, it seemed more powerful.
Oh, yeah. So he had
Because
buy-in.
he had buy-in, right?
Uh-huh.
He had all of them decree this.
Yeah. I think it's interesting thinking about this story and how long ago it took place that the worry is like the wives will become disobedient and the wives will kind of rebel against the husbands and um, that was a worry in our own country, you might say today, but definitely within the last 120 years, right? I mean, think about women's suffrage and you think about women going into the workplace and that it seems like quite a modern worry that they have, or maybe it's just an ancient worry that people in our own
Yeah,
country have.
more like that.
Um,
I think there's a sociological concept of like all throughout history you see the cycle of, I think it's termed the crisis of masculinity,
mhm,
where the men suddenly feel like it plays itself over and over and over. And
Yeah.
Men, for whatever reason, feel emasculated.
Yeah.
And then they become tyrants.
Right.
Right. Yeah, we can definitely see that playing out in its own way with the manosphere and we're taking it back, right? No, I mean there's this feeling of being threatened and we need to exert our authority and that's something that we're living through at the moment. All right, so that was chapter 1. Any questions or comments of things we haven't touched on? Oh, sorry, we didn't do the last verse. And yes, AJ.
So I was gonna say also sometimes like if you don't know what to do, if King Ahasuerus is actually just like, well, I asked my wife to come, she didn't come to me. I don't know, what should I do? Should I punish her? Should I not? Like your advisors are the people to ask. Like that's if you don't know what to do, that's where you go. So, you know, if in the case he didn't want to be like super cruel, but also, he's my wife, she's my wife, I love her, but also she disobeyed me and I'm the king, like he went to the right people. He went to the people assigned for that task.
Yes. Yeah, it just so happens, maybe he didn't have great advisors, which we'll see later on as well. But right, he went to the advisors who he knew and he followed protocol, right? The last verse was dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. All right. So Vashti is no longer in the palace. She's out of the picture. Some commentaries say that she was killed. Some say she was banished, like divorced. I'm thinking about the Debbie Friedman song. She goes, I was devoiced. That's not the voice. I was replaced with Esther's face. I don't know if anyone knows that song. Oh, yeah. I forget what it's got. It's something that might just be like the Vashti's song or something. But yes, a lesser known Debbie Friedman tune. So then we get to chapter 2, where the king gets a little lonely, right? Sometime afterwards, the anger of the king subsided. He thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Right? King, you need someone new, so let's find some new people for you. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan in the harem under the supervision of Hege, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics. So again, we see Hege, right? This Saris having a key role, right? Who supervises all of the women in the palace, all of the women in the harem. One might wonder if there is already a harem in place, why does this beauty pageant, why do the beautiful young virgins need to be brought? Unless it's that the king is just tired of the women in the harem. Right, exactly. But why is it that like thinking of Vashti in particular leads to this? But now we need some new people. So let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti. The proposal pleased the king and he acted upon it. So again, somebody saying, king, here's what you need to do. And the king saying, okay, I guess that's what I'm doing.
Based on law and precedent.
Yes.
Based on
Law and precedent.
precedent.
Yes.
Sounds
So,
like a porn story that's about to take
well,
place.
kind of, yeah, yeah. It wasn't exactly a beauty pageant, let's say. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite.
I never realized that he was the son of so many people.
Well, yes, that's the line, right? That he's from the
Okay,
tribe of
Mordecai,
Benjamin.
Jair, and Shimei. Okay, son of Kish. Okay. Is that a good?
In theory,
What's that?
the best loved son, perhaps?
Perhaps, yeah.
Is that a good line? Is that a strong lineage?
Um, I don't know. I don't know of
Doesn't matter.
commentary that talks about the importance of his ancestors. There might be. I don't know if they
Okay.
kind of, there's midrash that kind of says that he's royalty or anything.
Just
Have the 12 tribe, like, I don't really understand in my mind, like, where.
Yeah.
Are the tribes like dispersed by, like, do you know who?
Yes.
Still the tribe? The tribes have been, because this is after Babylon.
Yes, this is the destruction and the Babylonian destruction was in 586 before the Common Era. So that's when the first temple was destroyed and people were brought over to Babylon, and then the northern tribes actually kind of had been dispersed before that, with the Assyrians, I think kind of were the perpetrators there. So the Israelites at that point had gone to Babylonia, and then the Persians recaptured modern day Israel, let's say, and the Babylonians were no longer in control, and the Persians were somewhat friendly to the Israelites and let them come back and build the second temple. So this is that's under Persian rule, things are generally good for the Israelites.
And people still had a sense of like what tribe you were part of. Even if they
Yeah,
weren't
yeah,
first.
Exactly.
And AJ had put in the chat.
Oh,
Also, sometimes if you don't know what to do or how the populace will react, your advisors are the appropriate people to ask. That was from a few minutes ago. And then Mordecai's lineage also shows that he is legitimate and knows his parentage and ancestry.
mhm. Right. So, and then if we read one more verse, Kish, right, who's the great grandfather of Mordecai, it looks like, had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile along with King Jehoniah of Judah, who had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So there you go. His great grandfather was in that group of people, according to the story. So he was foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther. So we have these two names for the same person, and the relationship between the two is not totally clear. Some people would say like an uncle or a cousin, but it seems like I think there's probably some commentary that even says that it might have been her husband, but he was close to her in some ways, and there was some familial relation here. But it also says Bat Dodo, right? His cousin, the daughter of his uncle. So it's like it's not clear if he's really what the relationship is because there are a few different terms here. Because she didn't have a father or a mother. And she was Yifat Toar, of good appearance or shape, and Tovat Mareh, and nice to look at, of beautiful. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So, right, is he her cousin? Is he a foster father? Is he like a father to her? It's kind of all of these things all at once. And when the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many maidens were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women.
So she didn't have a choice.
Right. So, some people kind of make it to be that Mordecai told her and said, hey, you should apply for this. But it just seems like, okay, well, there was this guy Mordecai and there's this woman Esther who was under his care, and she went into the palace. And it doesn't seem that Mordecai has much say about that if you actually read the story.
Or there was any particular reason why Mordecai would think that it would be good for her to be
Right,
with the king. Like,
right.
they didn't show so much negativity toward Jews that you would say, hey, get in there so we can.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think at this point the Jews were pretty secure. They weren't othered, to the
Right.
extent that we might imagine they were in other places and under other rulers. So the maiden pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well as the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace, and he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem.
Really interesting to me in this part that sort of this eunuch
Yeah.
who is kind of like doing the filtering process. He's like, this is a maiden that the king should definitely meet.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like the version of the story I know was sort of egalitarian and like all these maidens went before the king and the king was like, oh, I like this Esther chick.
Uh-huh.
But this version is like, actually, she got a boost. She got handmaidens and good food and nice makeup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it goes on, So there is a little bit more about like when it's actually her turn and what the king thinks. But at this point, right, it seems that right, maybe she's getting some special treatment from like there's been some triage or some weeding out here. And Esther has kind of risen to the top. How many metaphors can I use? Of like so importantly, right, in verse 10, Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. So here's where Mordecai comes in, saying, don't
Yeah,
tell
don't.
them that you're Jewish,
Mm.
right? Or that you're related to me. And that obviously will play a role later on when she reveals her true identity to save the Jews. So every single day, Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what happened to her. So he's keeping an eye. He's learning how things are going. When each maiden's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of the 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics.
It's a long time.
It's a long time.
Sounds great. For a year and be beautified.
Yeah. It was after that that the maiden would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would,
Oh,
yeah.
what's our concubines, let's see, so there's there's the concubines.
Yeah.
Which one is for sex?
Definitely concubines.
Okay.
I don't know about the harem.
Okay.
I sort of assume the harem as well, but and maybe like concubines are one level above women in the harem, but doesn't say exactly. But a pilegesh is the Hebrew word for concubine, and that pops up throughout the Hebrew Bible. Like even like in the story of Jacob, right, with his wives were Rachel and Leah, but he had the Pilegesh, Bilhah, and Zilpah, who had children, that were ascribed to the wives, but they had children with Jacob. So there was obviously a sexual relationship there, but they were not at the status of wives, and the children weren't sort of ascribed to them. So here the king is looking for a queen, right? So he has all of these pilagshim, these concubines who he gets to have sex with, but there's only going to be one queen who presumably is going to be his favorite.
Which we don't know about for at least a year, because
Right.
every one of the women who were brought to him, it may have been one day after the other, but
Yeah.
it took at least a year to come to the decision.
Well, it
Yes.
was at least a year to prepare the women to be appropriately whatever.
Right.
For the
Mhm.
king.
So what
So
did
we
he,
don't know how long the
After that.
process takes.
right, so what did he do for the year?
Oh.
Clearly this is hyperbole, right? But the party went on for 6 months.
Right.
Probably went on for, right, so it was a month.
Yeah,
Yeah, everything
concubines.
here is just opulent and ornate and goes on for a long time. And
So
Okay,
That's how
all right, so
and
he could take his.
by the way, the sort of hyperbolic nature of the story is something to keep in mind. If we get to the end when it talks about all the people who were killed, in the thousands, it's just something to keep in mind that the numbers in the Book of Esther are not necessarily to be trusted. Not that any of this actually happened historically, but that this is the part of this kind of narrative is exaggeration,
Okay.
right? so she would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, whereupon she would be summoned by name. So you have this parade of women that are going in the night and leaving in the morning. Right? Not a part that we really highlight in a definitely in a kids' Purim spiel. Of like what was the selection process really like, right? And then if the king wanted her again, then he gets to ask for her. But this, it's just kind of like next in line, next in line, next in line. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Avichail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, right? So more like, wait, who is this? We need a family tree here. To go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian woman, advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her, right? She was so beautiful and that she didn't even need anything extra except for what Haggai had suggested. You know, she
I wonder
didn't
what
have
the
any.
extras are, like another dress or.
Yeah.
I wonder, no, I mean, I don't know, I also wonder,
Oh.
what did he advise her to take?
Right.
An extra tiara.
Or to take nothing
Or-
except for the tiara, right?
Right.
We know what he likes. So all who saw her were very taken with Esther, right? Esther went to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. So we started, does anyone remember what year of his reign we were in? We were in the 3rd year.
So, what?
We're now in the 7th year of his reign.
And he didn't have a.
So there
he
was
didn't
no
have a-
queen.
There's no
for-
queen
yeah,
for several years.
yeah.
But a lot of
A lot of
parents.
Yeah. Not to say he was abstinent at that
Yeah,
point.
right.
The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins. So he set a royal diadem upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Right? So,
So I'm just curious, if love is connected to obedience, is
Yeah.
that true here? Where if the king loved Esther, is the implication somewhat that there's?
that he saw that she would be obedient.
No, that he was obedient to her.
Oh. I don't know. That's a good question. I think, I mean, the way I read it is that he saw that she would be obedient, or he thought that she would be obedient to him, and in addition to her beauty and all of that, that she wouldn't be uppity like Vashti was.
Our Esther so smitten the king that the king thought, I'll do anything for you, my dear.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Which does
Mhm.
eventually seem to be the case, right? That he'll go against his advisor. So she becomes queen, right? And she wins the sex competition. I mean, really, that seems what it is, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we kind of sugarcoat it and say it was a beauty pageant.
Well, that's so interesting. So like, who better to counsel the women than someone that knows exactly what a man would want?
Uh-huh.
So these mixed are the teachers of.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, but they're not a threat, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
They can kind of teach the women about
Mm.
male anatomy and what they like sexually, but to do so in a way where they,
Can't practice.
The king's
they
not
yeah,
gonna
that's why they can
practice.
go in between the two spaces.
No question.
Yes, David.
So what happens to all these ex-virgins? I mean, who didn't get chosen? I mean, they're probably not looked upon very highly in society.
Oh. Hmm.
Well, right. I don't know what it means for their marriage prospects, if that's what you're saying. It could be that they stay in the harem or they stay as concubines in the palace. Although if it's all of the young maidens, it's probably not that. It might be that it's because it was all of them that there's not, I guess, a taint on them because, that's a whole generation, right? So,
It's the pretty ones.
Oh, it was just the pretty ones. Okay. So it might be that they stay in the palace. It's not clear. I mean, they don't really talk about what happens to them after the fact, after they're not chosen.
I know it's a story. I mean, the people
Yeah.
who wrote it, had messages to convey. So they didn't see the need to expand it further on this.
Right. They don't talk about what happened to Vashti. They don't talk about what happened to all of these other women in the palace, right? The focus is certainly on what's going on with the men in the palace and the decisions they're making, but what's subversive about it is the role that Esther plays in the fate of the Jews and in the decisions of the king, right? That's the woman who we're focusing in on the story, who has some agency here and um, can move the story along and gets the name of the book.
Maybe since they were pretty, the other men would overlook that they're not virgins.
Well, it's not, so the context of this is Zoroastrianism, right? So this society is, which still exists today, there's still Zoroastrian temple. And I don't know enough about it, but it'd be interesting to have more context around it, to know what that culture is with this story.
Mhm. Yeah, we know that according to the Torah, right, if a woman is found to not be a virgin at the time of her betrothal or her marriage, that's bad news. And so there's definitely a lower status in the Israelites' understanding of things, but this is not solely an Israelite or a Jewish setting that we're talking about. So that it might be you could read it maybe as a polemic, like a Jewish polemic against the values of all of the other peoples, that this is how they do things and that they don't care that their women aren't virgins. I I've never heard it being read that way, but I don't think it's so far out of the realm of possibility of this being a Jewish book saying this, look, we're so much better than these people. But it is also in participating in this that Esther was able to save the Jews. So just something to think about with that. So the king gives a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther, and a remission of taxes. All right, right, and gifts from the king. So big things, happy things. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai sat in the palace gate, but Esther did not reveal her kindred or her people as Mordecai had instructed her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding. Aha, she's obedient, as she had done when she was under his tutelage. At that time, when Mordecai was sitting at the palace gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the two were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the book of the annals at the king's behest. So Mordecai happens to be in the right time, in the right place, overhears these two servants who are actually plotting to kill the king, and through Esther saves the king's life and gets these two people killed. So Mordecai is in the book, right? He was somebody good. So far, haven't heard from the bad guy yet, right? That's what comes in this next chapter. So the first two chapters, no groggers. But then we get Groggers. So sometime afterward, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, as he advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellow officials. Where did he come from? We don't know, right? He wasn't that list of 7. It wasn't just like a little promotion, but he just sort of comes out of nowhere.
And we have no idea who the Agagites are.
We do. They are an enemy of the Israelites.
is everyone pointing out since like he over this, like India is part of the realm that
Yeah.
Haman is a major god in Hinduism.
Oh, is it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
The-
I didn't know. What do we know about Haman in Hinduism?
He's a monkey god. He's
Oh,
a mischievous fellow, isn't he? I think so. I don't know much about him, but it's like the one like Ganesh, Haman, and Shiva are like.
oh, okay,
Right. I think he's a trickster kind of guy.
okay, interesting.
Like it would have been, I think he would have been well known at this time. I don't know how far from India he would have been known, but for sure in India. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we also have to remember this is an Israelite author. I'm guessing they had never been to India. They might not have experienced any Hinduism, right? They imagine King Ahasuerus as having this rule over this vast space, but whether that actually ever happened or if anybody knew anything about these places in depth, is I'd say questionable. So I'm intrigued, but I'm also like a little bit careful about accepting their worldliness, let's say. So Haman is higher than anybody else. All of the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. Huh. So it's a little like, is Mordecai part of this group of the king's courtiers? Or is he just like a random guy who happens to be at the palace gate at that time? Is he hanging out around the palace as he was doing in the last chapter because Esther is there and he wants to kind of look over her? Right? It's not clear what Mordecai's status is within the palace, if he has one at this point. He overheard this and he saved the king's life, so maybe he's elevated. But maybe it's not clear if he has an official role or status here. But nonetheless, he was the one who would not bow down to Haman when everybody else would. Would not kneel or bow low.
Which I assume he would kneel and bow, but just not cross.
Well, it seems like, yeah, he wouldn't kneel and he wouldn't, though the Hebrew is yishtachave, which is just the word for bow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about like the level to which, or the depth of his bowing. It just says he wouldn't kneel or bow. And then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's order?" When they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail, for he explained to him that he was a Jew. So that was his reasoning. And when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low, or just bow to him, Haman was filled with rage. So there's this one guy who's not doing what, right? Again, we have this thing with obedience, right? And punishment for disobedience. Yeah, go ahead.
It's almost an exact parallel of Vashti.
Uh-huh.
There's a king's decree, someone doesn't follow, and the someone is generalized into an entire group of people.
Yeah, right. All of the women are going to disdain their husbands, right? Mordecai is a Jew and isn't bowing low because he's a Jew. Let's get rid of all the Jews. Right? So yeah, I think there is this caution of generalizing one person, one person's actions and decisions into the entire community of
Do Orthodox Jews not, so it makes me think of this Christian sect of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
Where they refuse to vote or say the Pledge of Allegiance, or they religiously won't give allegiance to anything other than God. So is there a similar concept for Orthodox Jews? Like we won't say the Pledge of Allegiance or?
No, I mean there's definitely a desire to not be idolatrous, right? So we don't bow to people, or, I mean, I don't know that they would refuse to bow, like if they were meeting the Prime Minister of Japan, right? And like it's standard to bow to him. I don't know, as a greeting, I don't know that they would refuse that, but bowing as a symbol of showing like you are like a god over me is not something that they would do. Uh, yeah, that's we could, I mean, that I don't know, I don't have like specific knowledge about Orthodox practice about that, but that's my guess.
I had the experience of when I was meeting an Orthodox couple in my neighborhood. Um, the man said, when we were introduced, he said, "You can shake my wife's hand."
That,
So-
yeah, well,
so
that,
that's-
yeah.
I mean, no, it's not exactly the same, but I guess there are certain things that they stick by, for,
Yeah, that's more about not touching somebody of a different
right,
gender,
right.
because of modesty and that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Rabbi, this is
Yes,
Barbara.
yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
Do you know anything about the story of that Mordecai and Haman had actually met a number of years before, and that Mordecai, in exchange for food, Haman wrote something on the sole of his shoe saying that he agreed to become a slave, and that was actually part of all of this, that when he'd want him to bow, he'd just raise up his shoe and wave it at him?
I have not heard that. I wonder if that's a midrash or something.
Mhm.
I don't know. I've never heard that.
No, I'd read something once in a Chabad commentary.
Hmm. I don't know. That's new information for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Achashverosh. So this broad generalization of I'm going to get rid of all of the Jews because of what Mordecai did. And so it's interesting that Mordecai, the text just told us several times that he cautioned Esther, don't tell them you're a Jew, don't tell them who your people are, and she's not doing it, just as Mordecai commanded. And it seems like Mordecai's pretty open with that information, for himself, right? That when people say, why aren't you bowing down to Haman? He says, it's because I'm a Jew. So he doesn't hide that for himself, but he's very careful about telling Esther to hide it for herself. Just an interesting note. I'm not exactly sure what to make of that. And in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, which means the lot, was cast before Haman concerning the day and every month until it fell on the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So the holiday, when we read this, is Purim, which is the plural for Pur, which means lot. Like he's doing a lottery to figure out which day he's going to kill the Jews on, right? So that's where we get the name Purim. So the month of Nisan is the month in which we have Passover. So that's the month that this is happening in. And then the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, is the one in which the killing will actually happen. So it's about a year between when Haman makes this decision and when it's actually going to happen. 11 months or so. Even now you might say, wait a second, why is the first month in the spring and not when we have the high holidays and Rosh Hashanah, which is, there's a whole
Right.
Mishnah about that there are 4 new years throughout the year. And one is the new year for counting years, which is in the 7th month, which is Tishrei, which is when we have Rosh Hashanah. But then there's a new year in the month for, I forget what it's for, like for the reign of kings, in Nisan. If it's to like, if you say we're in the third year of King Ahasuerus's reign, when does that turn over? It's not on the actual anniversary of when he became king. It's like on the 1st of Nisan. And then there's the new year for counting the age of trees, which is Tu B'Shvat, which we just celebrated. So
the term Purim
yeah,
is based on when Haman has decided to go kill the Jews.
yeah, it's
And that's what
it's
they
a lottery.
celebrate.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So go
Yeah,
buy a
so
lotto ticket. Um, so now Haman has made this decision, and now he's going to go manipulate the king. Haman then said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws, and it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them." So again, we know that the king does not like disobedience, right? That's how Esther was elevated in the first place. So Haman is saying, look, these people are disobedient too. They're not following your laws. They don't care about you. Let's get rid of them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury. So not just let's kill them, but I'll pay for it. Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. And the king said, "The money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." Right? The signet ring, right? That's how the king makes things official, right? When you see the royal seal, it's an official decree. So the king is taking off his ring and saying, "Sure, do whatever you want."
It just doesn't seem like a very thoughtful guy.
No, he's
No,
not
no,
very
yeah.
strategic.
And,
Sounds like Elon.
you know, I've been thinking about, I can't get my mind off.
I think they're,
King
yeah.
hiring this crazy guy. I'm thinking that we're talking about,
He's a
Eli.
smart rich guy.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
He offered to give, remember during the election, he gave people
right. He
like
gave,
$1 million
yeah,
and $1 million to vote.
that's right. Let's get rid of, yeah, that's. How many signet rings does the king have? If he gives
Presumably
it?
one.
So that's it now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Haman has the power
Uh,
to make these decrees, right, with the authority of the king.
Okay.
Can I say something random?
Sure.
So reading through this and paying attention to the time,
Yeah.
one thing that I sort of notice and I'm like, this is missing is like there's no heirs happening here.
Uh-huh.
At no point do they say like, and Queen Esther, birthed the next prince.
Yeah.
And I sort of have the same question about like Vashti.
Mhm.
Were there any kids?
Mm.
Isn't this king getting a little worried?
Hmm.
Mhm. Hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, there's no discussion of that at all.
Wow.
It's really just about the king's pleasure and people obeying him.
Yeah.
Right.
He's super
that-
young, so he has a lot of time. Like, right? He just had a year of nonstop sex. Like, you can only do that when you're 20.
7 years?
Yeah, I know, really.
There should be at
18 to
least
28.
Right.
With all those concubines, you would think. All right. So, the decree is put out there. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because we're running a little kind of short on time. We've only made it through 2.5 chapters, which is great. I love it. Just hopefully you didn't come here expecting to do the whole Megillah. So it seems that once a
Skipping to.
I don't know yet. I'll let you know.
Okay.
It seems like once a royal decree is made, it can't be undone. There can be a different decree, but you can't just kind of erase it and wipe it away, which is important to know when we get to the end of the story, because right, this decree goes out that the Jews can be exterminated, and spoiler is that the decree that's going to go out at the end of the story is that the Jews can defend themselves. It's not that the extermination is canceled. It's that the Jews can actually fight back, and that's why, and it's a very bloody ending to the story, uh, presumably because it's not just that the Jews went on a rampage, but there were actually fights going on, right, between the two sides, um, of people following the king's decree, or decrees, I should say. Um, so it, in addition to killing them, the decree was that the people of Shushan and of the kingdom could also plunder their possessions. So there was a monetary aspect to it as well. Which, by the way, during the Inquisition, people who turned in secret Jews or Muslims to the authorities, to the inquisitors, would actually get the property of the people they turned in. So there was, people would be turning in neighbors sometimes without reason, or without any truth, because they would get their property. So that's something that has been throughout history, as well. So let's go then to, let's go to chapter 4. So Mordecai hears about all of this. He tears his clothes and puts on sackcloth and ashes, which is a show of mourning. And he went about throughout the city crying loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate, for one could not enter the palace gate while wearing sackcloth. That's not appropriate palace attire.
Not fashionable.
Yeah. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther summoned Hattach, one of the eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. So throughout this story, we're not just seeing the role of the eunuchs, but we're also getting names for them. And all that, it's not just the same one over and over again, but we're getting all of these different names for them, whether they're plotting to kill the king, or they're the chief one for the king, or they're Esther's. So it's just an interesting way to sort of highlight their role in the story. There are plenty of Torah stories where we don't know character names, right? Like the wife of Noah, the wife of Lot, usually women, not only, but Paro, right? People who play big roles, but in here we do have their names, which is just an interesting piece of this. And it's also fun to like see all of these Persian names that so he won't put on the new clothes that she's trying to give him, and she's trying to figure out why. So Hattach went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordecai told him all that happened to him and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews.
So he
Yeah.
knew, but it sounds like Esther didn't.
It seems like
No.
Esther's in the dark here.
Yeah.
Like she's not putting on sackcloth and ashes
Right.
like every other Jew in the kingdom.
Right, she's wondering why.
Maybe because she's sort of detached from her people. Her only connection is Mordecai. It's clear that he has some knowledge that she doesn't have.
Yeah, like she didn't hear it while she was walking from one room in the palace to
Right,
the other. No
right.
conversations shared with her about.
And eunuchs are referred to with male pronouns.
Yes, they are. Yeah, eunuchs are grammatically male. So when Hathach came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hathach to take back to Mordecai the following reply. So there's a lot of this back and forth, right? It's not Mordecai and Esther talking to each other. It's this back and forth that Hathach is playing this key role in. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, to be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for 30 days. This is what Esther is saying.
Mm.
When that's what Mordecai is saying to Esther. Right?
No,
No.
that's,
You're right, you're
Esther
right.
sent the,
Right, thank you. That is Esther. And when Mordecai was told what Esther said, he said, verse 13, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. This is sort of a famous one that comes about in a lot of spiels. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis.
A lot there. In
Yeah,
Well, there's also the hint that the Jews may well be saved, but not through Esther's action.
right.
And it's so interesting that there's so much mourning when Mordecai is so confident that they're not going to die.
Yeah. But he's included in the mourners, right? He's wearing sackcloth and ashes but you're right, he has this knowledge, hope, faith, whatever you want to call it, that the Jews will be saved from somewhere else, but
Oh.
not Esther and not her father's house, right? She'll perish.
but where do you get that Mordecai thinks that they'll be saved?
Relief
says-
and deliverance will
Back
come
in
to the
13.
Jews from another quarter.
In verse 14.
I
Um,
thought, actually, if you keep silent, relief and deliverance will come to the, if you keep silent in this crisis, well, you and your father's house will perish. Well, so the other Jews will be saved, but you won't?
Yeah.
Now, are these messages back and forth, like they wrote it down and folded up the paper and put it in a sealed envelope?
That's my question.
Because
Yeah.
the
Is
unit-
Hathach, like, does
because the
Hathach have all
units
this
now have
information?
all this information, and
Right.
who are they loyal to, and who are they, why would they keep quiet if they know that this is going on?
Right. Yeah, and he's explicit in this message that she is a Jew.
Right.
Right. So it's not clear if it's written down in secret or if it's just a message that Hathach is
Just
speaking,
let it-
right? And hearing and speaking, which is kind of an amazing thing to think about, that person's role, right? In keeping secrets
right,
and what it
they-
means to attend to somebody, even if you're serving in the palace of the king, right? That you might not tell him everything.
Right, you may be loyal, have to be loyal
It
to
used to be
certain
this way
people.
in Indonesia.
Hmm.
So in Java, it's all changed in the last 100 years because of Saudi Arabia, actually. But Indonesia historically has been like, their Islam has been based on Sufism.
Hmm.
So for instance, in a city still there called Yogyakarta, it's where I believe the only transgender mosque is.
Hmm.
The closest we could say is male to female. They're called warrior. They're now like sex workers, but 100 years ago, they used to be in the court of the Sultan, and they were seen as, and they attended, and they were seen as women that didn't bleed, so therefore more pure. So it's right. So like I said, like this sort of like attendance by no, they're not castrated, but they are considered a third gender. So I guess I'm saying that to say that like it's very recent history that this sort of thing still happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that context.
Yeah.
I just want to finish the chapter, and I think we're going to be out of time. So I apologize that we are only getting to 4 chapters, but maybe it kind of is whetting your appetite to look to read the Megillah
rest
on
of
your
it,
own,
yeah.
or to, as the Megillah is being chanted, to look at the English translation. So then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. And so Mordecai did just that. So what comes next is that Esther does go to the king without being called, right? Which is dangerous, right? She's going against the rules, and we know that this king likes the rules. His advisors like him to follow the rules. But he starts to not follow the rules later on in the story. So he extends the golden scepter to her when she comes to him, which many people can interpret sexually, that she touches the tip of his scepter, and he's all of a sudden in her hands, and will do whatever she says. But it's this risk of going to the king that eventually leads to the salvation of the Jews, and that she gets to reveal at this feast, at this drinking feast, her Jewish identity, and that Haman is the one who is trying to attack her and her people, which leads to his downfall. So it's so there's so much focus on who can go where at what times and what are the rules, and and then this subverting of those rules that brings salvation, and that carries into our practice of Purim, which is where the rules are sort of turned on their head, right? And this is a topsy-turvy day where you wouldn't normally do the things that you can do on Purim. And so that theme of celebrating and salvation through disobedience, going against the norm is a practice even in very traditional communities that do adhere very strictly to laws and have very set ways of doing things. So it's an interesting day that sort of mimics the flow of this story of turning things on their head and going against expectations. So we still have, by the way, the fast of Esther. Ta'anit Esther is a practice that some Jews have before Purim to emulate what the Jews and Esther were doing before this feast that she's going to be holding for Haman and King Ahasuerus. So a little bit more in your pocket when you celebrate Purim in a couple of weeks. Thanks for exploring the first 4 chapters of the book with me, and I hope it was enlightening.
Yeah,
Sure.
that was. I think growing up in conservative, we just did it in Hebrew,
Right.
and then someone explains the story, the short version.
Right. When do we actually sit down and like study the text?
read all.
All right.
Okay.
Nice to see everybody on Zoom. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.